Thank you, Julie, and thank you to the GPI and the Government of Peru for giving us the opportunity to present here today. I think I may have set myself up for the first red card because I've added a few slides, but we'll see how we go. So apologies if this is death by 1,000 slides. However, what we're going to do is basically try and give you an overview of some of the peatlands in the Australia-Oceania region. I'll refer you to the Oceania chapter of the Global Peat Assessment for a more thorough appraisal, if you like, and cross-section. I'll be concentrating more on the Australian situation. However, I will say from the outset that most of all of what I'll be presenting here is nothing new from what I've heard over the last few days. It just reinforces that there's similar issues, similar gaps, similar opportunities. So let's get started. What people don't understand is in Australia, our peatlands go from up near the sand mangroves in New Guinea through to the east coast into the desert where we've actually got mound springs that are actually all permanent groundwater-fed springs out in the desert, are basically all comprising peat, and we finish up through the southeast and the southwest in the alpine, and then the more terrestrial area, Mediterranean type climate in the southwest of Australia, and then down through Tasmania, and we finish up with moss peat banks down in the polar Antarctic region. So we cover a massive cross-section. That just gives you an idea. Originally, most of our mapping was more of a crown and a drawing on a map. However, in recent times, since basically about 2019, I've been working on a seamless actual spatial data set. That's about the extent of it now, and you can see that our peatlands cover basically every state and territory, and then down to the polar Antarctic regions. Just to give you an idea in terms of carbon stocks, this is a peatland area in the southeast of South Australia, adjacent to a karst mound spring. It has over 2 metres, over 55% organic carbon at depth, and you're looking up well over 1,500 tonnes per hectare of actual carbon. What you'll see here, as a result of the clearing, that the actual carbon percentage is lower in the top sort of 35 centimetres, but once you get below that, you actually get into more pristine and what where we've got undisturbed sites, the situation looks like. So we do have some reasonable carbon stocks. And I do note that at one stage or somewhere in the agenda they're looking at carbon accrual rates. I can flip that on its head and actually talk about carbon loss rates as a result of loss of the soil profile and compaction. So moving along, we were fortunate. We've actually got data going back to 1939. One of the unique studies we have here is actually a soil survey from 1942 that was done by one of the leading authorities at the time, who was C.J. Stevens, has an award under the annual Soil Science conference each year. What he did was meticulously survey an area that was about to be drained that comprises karst springs, and the reason they were actually doing the survey was to look at potential for agriculture. What they did do was actually a very thorough study, and we managed to find these actual samples out in a shipping container at the back of the National Archive, and we've resampled them. So this is his actual work. One site we'll actually touch on is this one, which is 20 chains up from Hitchcock's Drain up on Drain M. So we move down. This is what it looks like originally before drainage, thick tea tree thicket, very fibrous peat, and high organic matter. That's the actual same profile of that site in 2024. It still has 1.6 metres of peat. And so that's looking at the original trip tray, or our trip trays, and someone was asking me, what is a trip tray? This is what we actually use for our incubation process. You'll see in this kite, persistence, 1942 went to 157 centimetres, 2024 it went to 160, so it's holding. We go to another site, which is actually where we've seen a lot of collapse. We go to 203 centimetres here, we go to 35 there. So quickly, it's already been mentioned about what gets mapped, gets protected and restored and counted and reported on, so definitions are important. We go through here and look at one of our frameworks, if you like, from definition to mapping, classification and assessment. So we do an assessment that looks at values as, whoopsie daisy, what have I done now? Fine. We're back. And so we look at assessment from the, as well as values, and there are strong Indigenous values. These are all refugia and have very strong Indigenous knowledge. We then look at typologies and try and characterise what particular site condition it is, and then we develop implementation plans, management actions. One of the unique things here is we've actually got fire management. Some of our sites are actually adapted to fire. They need a fire for the full species assemblage of flora to actually complete its life cycle. We get orchids early and acacias colonisers in the first 5-10 years, if you like. Then you can move through to an alpha dominant state, almost a monoculture after 35 years. So they do require a burn to reset, which is a bit unique. I'm not certain other jurisdictions, countries, I've had that reported, but that's something that's not necessarily unique to this side in South Australia that I'm reporting on. It's also through to some of the subtropical areas as well. So it'll be interesting to know if others have actually got peats that require fire. This is just then quickly touching on some of the established methods as well as some of the newer ones. I probably should be putting field cameras and some of these other bits, moving them over to the monitoring. The reason I've got remote sensing still here is because of the recent advances, if you like, in some of the radar data, but also some of the new metrics that are possible. Okay, this is eating into my... I'll be red carded shortly. Oh, I can go over there, right. Joe, but then low-cost field fluxes, as we've heard, we've been doing a lot. We've actually got some very low-cost flux greenhouse gas real-time reporting systems under $2,000 that actually sit in open water, but we're working on some others so that can go into a more terrestrial environment. So the other things we're looking at is eDNA. We've tried ground-penetrating radar. Didn't really work that well. We do a lot with X-ray computer tomography, looking at pore space and characterising pristine as against to degraded peat, and then X-ray diffraction, looking at mineralisation. This is just a quick example of some of the restoration. Basically, agricultural weeds and a drain, had a bit of a controlled burn put through the area so the backhoe could actually get in there. So re-wetting, and you go from June 2022 to October 2025, basically over 70 and 80 species. If you go back there now, it's well over my head. What we've done is actually try to develop, as we mentioned, some new metrics. This is actually trying to see could we pick up the increase in water in that landscape. So we're looking at paired sites. In this case, we've got a reference site and a treatment site. The actual treatment came in here. You can see in a normalised difference water index that treatment site is now well above the reference site as a line of evidence. Moving to another one, looking out at the right-hand side of the wavelength band, if you like. SWIR picks up shortwave infrared, absorbs a lot of water as opposed to reflecting it. The intervention came in here. You can see a clear step change in actually picking up that water. Another example here, looking at the full spectral profile, where you've got basically your visual bands through here, your biomass up here, your water and your lignin and cellulite out through there. 2018, you can see the site was quite different here, quite different up here. If we fast forward to 2025, you can actually see they're very much in alignment between the treatment and the reference. The reasons we've got different here is actually this treatment has become wetter, but also the actual reference site had quite a lot of flowering for senescence, which has actually increased that reflection. So this again is just low-cost lines of evidence. Very quickly, another example, this is actually looking at long-term Landsat archive, but this was an area that had been basically cleared in the 1940s. It was actually a cattle stock. It hasn't actually had a peat vegetative site on it since 1949. If you go back and have a look at what's happened, basically the re-wetting, you can see the water spreading out. Within a couple of years, you had that, and then after 3 years, you basically had that. So you've over 130 species in there. Some haven't been seen for 50 years. Some haven't been reported that far south ever. So the residual seed bank is amazing. This is just another line of evidence. You can see through here, Phragmites, which is basically active senescent and actually a monoculture invader of a lot of our peatland areas. And then we basically finish up with a permanent green signal. This is just a combination of fractional cover, so permanent green photosynthesizing vegetation, dry vegetation, bare earth, a tassel cap moisture, and then a free water. Again, simple, cheap lines of evidence. And then I'll just move through to one of our last slides. We've talked about the need for mapping, recognition, actual inventories and gaps, some of the knowledge gaps that we've mentioned that are unique, that are not unique to us. It appears everyone's looking at flux, they're looking at peat depth, they're looking at bulk densities, especially at depth. They're looking at condition and threats, management actions, and then basically investment opportunities, because I think that's been the message through here. It's about opportunities. And that's it. So just as the red card was coming up, I've made the cut.
Thank you, Chris. Le doy la palabra a Evelyn.
Buenos días a todos. Primero quisiera extender el saludo de la directora general de Cambio Climático, que por motivos de agenda no ha podido estar presente. Bueno, lo que he venido a contarles esta mañana es cómo desde el Ministerio del Ambiente de la Dirección y la Dirección General de Cambio Climático estamos abordando el tema de turberas, ¿no? Digamos, bajo la premisa del conocimiento científico al sistema de monitoreo, reporte y verificación nacional. Entonces, bien, creo que esto ha sido ya bastante abordado en estos días, pero quisiera resaltar que se reconoce, ¿no?, la importancia de este ecosistema, y es así que está considerado como una medida de mitigación del sector UTCUS para contribuir a nuestra NDC. Entonces, pues tenemos alrededor de 6.2 millones de hectáreas que tienen un carbono almacenado de 5.4 petagramos de carbono, que bueno, esto es un equivalente a 19.8 gigatoneladas si esto fuera liberado, ¿no? Entonces vemos que es un gran potencial y es un ecosistema bastante importante. Entonces, desde el sistema MRV, ¿cómo es que estamos incorporando esta información que ya por bastantes años ha sido también estudiada, ¿no? Hay institutos como el Instituto de Investigación de la Amazonía Peruana, que ha realizado múltiples investigaciones, digamos, un poco más acotado en el área, en el departamento de Loreto. Entonces, ya con esta necesidad de integrarlo en nuestras NDC, y también, como estuve escuchando un poco en los resúmenes de la mañana, ver cómo esto también produce tal vez algunos beneficios y cómo podría ser abordado también en el mercado de carbono, es por ello que desde la información que actualmente tenemos en el sistema MRV, tenemos una data histórica que hemos producido en los últimos años, donde pues están evaluando alrededor de 33.000 parcelas de evaluación en todo el bioma amazónico, esto bajo una estratificación de 4 ecozonas, que esto alineado también al Inventario Nacional Forestal y de Fauna Silvestre del Perú, que son selva alta, selva alta accesible, selva alta de difícil acceso, selva baja y zona hidromórfica. Son estas 4. Y se tienen parcelas de interpretación en todo el bioma amazónico, ¿no? Bajo esta modalidad de muestreo, según el nivel 3 del IPCC, es que nosotros estamos reportando también cómo es que está fluctuando, cómo es que se está desarrollando la deforestación y el cambio de uso del suelo, ¿no? Entonces, ya con esta data, que se tiene información de 20 años, desde el 2001 hasta el 2023, lo que se ha hecho, este primer paso, es usar el mapa de HASTI, el mapa del 2022, para hacer este cruce con las parcelas que tenemos actualmente, ¿no? Y lo que se ha obtenido es que tenemos en las ecozonas selva baja y zona hidromórfica alrededor de 18.000 muestras que caen en áreas de peatlands, ¿no? Y se ha visto además que 95 de estas muestras presentan perturbación, algún tipo de dinámica en el cambio de uso, ¿no? Representa el 0,52%. Entonces, como ven, todavía es una primera aproximación. Sin embargo, y bueno, en realidad esto de hecho igual es importante porque va a ser la primera vez que vamos a integrar data histórica a nuestras comunicaciones internacionales. Vamos a presentar esta información como primera aproximación en el BTR2 que se presenta a final de año, y también lo vamos a usar para la actualización de nuestro siguiente nivel de referencia. Entonces, esto también nos da a nosotros, bueno, como ministerio tal vez, nos abre las oportunidades y la necesidad más adelante de seguir produciendo y, bueno, integrando a más actores en esta importante tarea, ¿no? Para, pues, mejorar esta información, ¿no? Actualmente el error de muestreo, pues, no está desarrollado, no está trabajado, digamos, el diseño de muestreo para producir exactamente información de turberas. Es por eso que en este slide se ha querido resumir cuáles serían nuestros siguientes, cuáles serían nuestros siguientes pasos o qué necesitamos, ¿no?, para fortalecer el monitoreo de turberas en el MRV nacional. Entonces, lo que es, en primer lugar, abordar las turberas como un estrato adicional, ¿no?, tal vez como un estrato que sume a estas 4 ecozonas que ya teníamos. Esto hará que definitivamente el diseño de muestreo, los errores disminuyan, los rangos de incertidumbre también mejoren, y pues que tengamos información trazable y consistente que pueda ser usada también en temas de mercado de carbono, ¿no? Como les mencioné, la información pues todavía está siendo evaluada a nivel de cambio de uso de suelo, deforestación, pero también es importante abordar la degradación de estas turberas, ¿no?, que como sabemos pues también causa emisiones durante largo tiempo. Entonces es importante también ver cómo es la dinámica de esta actividad de degradación. En cuanto a los factores de emisión, como mencioné al inicio, sí que hay información importante a nivel nacional. El IAP ha hecho bastante producción científica, eso es muy importante, pero lo que requerimos ahora es pues extender tal vez estas muestras a diferentes partes del bioma amazónico, ¿no? Como vieron en el slide anterior, tenemos turberas incluso en la parte de Ucayal y de Madre de Dios. La mayoría de las investigaciones han estado centradas tal vez por ahora en Loreto, pero es importante continuar con la evaluación en campo ya en estas regiones adicionales. También, una vez que abordemos tal vez esto con mayor claridad, es importante que extendamos esta investigación a nuestros otros ecosistemas también, ¿no? En sierra tenemos bastante cantidad de bofedales y en la costa los manglares, ¿no? Y es así que también el MRV ya no estaría solo centrado en el bioma amazónico, sino tener la información nacional. Entonces, ¿cuáles son las oportunidades del monitoreo para la gestión climática, red y carbono de alta integridad? Pues, como mencioné, esta información que estamos produciendo basada en muestreo sistemático tiene como objetivo ser multipropósito, ¿no? Entonces, va a ser presentado en el BTR, en el INGEI, en el nivel de referencia, y también nos sirve para mediante el proceso de anidación de los proyectos red también se alineen a esto y de esa forma lograr tener carbono de alta integridad, ¿no? Entonces es muy importante tener este desarrollo del MRV robusto que nos va a permitir también como país lograr los pagos por resultados y también apoyar a iniciativas pioneras como Red Indígena Jurisdiccional, que es, pues es la primera experiencia de un programa jurisdiccional liderado por organizaciones indígenas que justamente están en estas zonas de Loreto donde se encuentran mucha extensión de turberas, ¿no? Entonces, ellos van con un enfoque de HFLD, de esta conservación que se ha hecho históricamente a las turberas y es importante el trabajo que nosotros vayamos a hacer en conjunto para la alineación propia también a los estándares de alta integridad. Eso sería todo, gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Next speaker, Hans.
Yes, I have been asked to tell you a little bit about peat formation and long-term carbon accumulation. How does it work? Oh, the other one. This one? This one. That's okay.
You prefer this?
Is this better or?
If you want to move.
Oh, no, I don't want to move. In natural peatlands that we call mires, the production of organic material is larger than the decay, and as a result, dead plants accumulate as peat. And this peat is conserved by water saturation. Peat is like pickled gherkins. When you remove the conserving water, the organic matter rots away to CO2. And therefore, natural peatlands are always wetlands. You should keep in mind, a peatland is not a tree. It does not grow in the same way as a tree in a one-dimensional way. You have to see it in a three or even a four-dimensional way. Because the challenge is that natural peatlands are water. They are wetter than milk and beer. Here you see a comparison how much water a human being, an old and a young one contains, beer contains, and only gherkins have a little bit more water than peatlands. So long-term peat accumulation means the piling up of water. Ever tried to do so? It is very complex. We have also the problem that in deep water, no peat accumulation takes place because plant production needs CO2 and light, and both are becoming limited. So you find only peat in shallow water. And that prevents actually water peatlands to become very thick. So for long peat accumulation, the water level must continuously rise, either by external causes or caused by the peatland itself. Here you see an example of an external cause when, for example, through deforestation, the water level in the landscape rises, you get the accumulation of peat, and it may increase when the deforestation increases. Another example are flood mires, where, for example, next to rivers that increase their bedding and their walls next to them, the regional water level increases, and also the peat accumulation can continue upwards. Most interesting are sloping mires, where there is a kind of slope, because there the vegetation and the newly accumulated peat slow down the water flow, and in this way raise the water level to ever higher levels. And these sloping mires have actually three strategies. Very simple ones are the percolation mires, where the water flow goes to the major part of the peat body. We have the surface flow mire, where the peat is, or the water flow is concentrated at the surface, and actually only the vegetation enables to regulate the water flow. And you have the so-called acrotel mires, where water flow principally takes place in the uppermost peat layer and in the vegetation. We only know acrotel mires as ombrotrophic mires, rain-fed mires, what we call bogs. And it is these that, because of their self-regulation capacity, are able to grow rather far highwards. Acrotel raised bogs are very well regulated, and you can see it because they cover the widest range of all ombrotrophic peatlands. Here for Europe, you can see it. The blues are the blanket bogs, which are surface flow mires. The green, you do not even see them. They are at the east coast of the Black Sea in Georgia. We only have found five examples of them. And the rest, you see the aquatellenborgs, how widely they are spread from the northern boreal up to the Nimeral zone in the south, and from the Atlantic to fur into the continental area. You can compare peatlands with people. We've done that by comparing the age distribution of different types of peatlands, compare them with countries. And the passive mayas that only fill up existing water bodies that might rise because of external purposes, they do not become very old. You see that the terrestrialization mayas that fill up open water have the same age distribution as, for example, a country like Kiribati, and water rise mayas, where the water rise is pushed up by external factors, looks like Botswana, with very many young peatlands and hardly old peatlands. The sloping mayas, the so-called active mayas, they are different. Cattle hole mayas grow, when they have originated, they keep on growing up. Percolation mayas and aquatellenborgs do the same, and they are comparable with countries like China, Monaco, and Ukraine, where you see that there is an even age distribution over the different age classes. In most parts of the world, ice ages and glaciers prevent peatlands from becoming very old, for the simple reason that in the entire northern zone, either glaciers are going to cover the land and bulldoze the peatlands away, and that happens every 100,000 years, or because of the lowering of the seawater level in the last ice age, the global seawater level was 120 meters deeper than currently. The climate all over the Earth becomes much drier, and peat accumulation can only take place in very favorable circumstances. The deepest and oldest peatlands in the world are found where tectonics, so geological processes, cause a continuous lowering of the land, and as a result, a rise of the relative water level. Here I plotted on the x-axis the time, and on the y-axis the depth of the peatlands. And you see that the deepest peatland that we know, it is, what is it, I cannot see it, 2.5 million years old and 568 meters deep, is Funza in the Andes in Colombia. And here you see some other ones. The Agropontino is rather deep, 60 meters. The Nao Centarme in Indonesia, 18 meters. The Grand Pile in France, 20 meters. El Padul in Spain is 93 meters deep. And we have Philippi, Thessaloniki in Greece, that is 280 meters deep. These are the deepest peatlands that we know. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Now we will hear from Dani Kusmayadi from Indonesia.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dani. I am a GIS analyst at ITVC. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. This presentation, sorry. Come back. Okay. This presentation was prepared by Mr. Agus and myself. So please allow me to present it on behalf of the team. And if there are any questions, of course, Mr. Agus is here and will be answer each questions. Okay, today I would like to briefly introduce Indonesia's lessons and experiences on monitoring hydrology, carbon, and greenhouse gas emissions. Protection and management of peatland ecosystem contribute directly to Indonesia's commitment under the NDC. So Indonesia applies a few or several complementary measures in peatland management. First, protecting the peatlands that remain in good condition. And second, promoting sustainable management practices to ensure that peatland utilization remains in environmentally sound. Okay. For the third and fourth, preventing of peatland damage and drying, which are often caused by, of course, drainage, fires, and land conversion. And for the degraded peatland, of course, restoration measures are implemented, and this include reallocation of peatland functions, hydrological restoration, and rehabilitation of peatland function. So, what are the results of Indonesia's mitigation action from the 2021 to 2024? Historically, the greenhouse gas emissions from these peatland areas, were estimated at 785 million tons CO2 equivalent per year for the period 2006 to 2020. For the period 2021 to 2024, the emission reduced to approximately 768 million tons CO2 equivalent per year. So, as the result, the estimation of the emission reduction during 2021 to 2024 reached approximately 16.8 million tons CO2 equivalent per year, or 50 million tons CO2 for the 3 years. Next. Now, but peatlands are more than carbon stores. They represent our responsibility to maintain ecosystem resilience by protecting the biodiversity. Like we can see here, baby rusa, Sumatran rhinoceros, and others, and how this continuous reducing fire risks, and how to lowering the peatland criticality levels, and of course how to supporting the local livelihoods through social forestry. We can see here 1.4 million hectares only in peatland areas in Indonesia. So the peatland management in Indonesia has a major responsibility to ensure the sustainable management of peatlands. This is a continuous effort that cannot be stopped or put on hold. Peatland management is not only about protecting wildlife, it is also about improving people's well-being, while ensuring that peatlands are conserved for future generation through this social forestry. Okay. Therefore, the local communities in the social forestry area must be engaged in peatland management to reduce the fire risks and how to lowering peatland criticality levels. Okay. So, what is the strategy? Successful peatland restoration requires not only policy, field implementation, but also strong scientific evidence and continuous innovation. And in Indonesia, research and innovation have become key pillars for supporting peatland restoration and achieving the climate change mitigation targets. Currently, at least 17 higher education institutions and 10 research institutions are involved in peatland restoration research and technology development and innovation. Their contributions help ensure that restoration approaches are science-based, measurable, and adaptive to local conditions. Then the research and development research in peatland restoration can be grouped into 6 main areas. First, the peatland monitoring system. We use the Sipalaga system or peatland water monitoring information system based on the groundwater level monitoring equipments. Then, second, peatland water management, including water balance calculations and assessment of the impact of canal blocking on the peat or water balance. And the third, the polyculture development. This focuses how implementing agroforestry, agrosilvofishery, that the system are both environmentally sustainable and economically viable on peatlands. Then for economy and carbon, this focuses on how the local communities can benefit from payment for ecosystem services. And six, the information system. This focuses how implementing the information system that capable of monitoring the peatlands in Indonesia. And the last, the peat demonstration. This demonstrates how a successful restoration model can be replicated in other locations in Indonesia. Then, what is the goal? The next step, of course, is translating the scientific knowledge into an operational restoration model. And Indonesia has adopted a systematic and integrated peatland restoration approach at the scale of the peat hydrological unit or KHG map. This will be explained in this next session. And to achieve this goal, Indonesia applies 6 key operational principles. First, establish the function of the peatland ecosystem and manage the ecosystem according to its functions. Apart from the KHG map I mentioned before, Indonesia also has a peat ecosystem function map, where this separates the protection function and the cultivation function. Then, second, how to ensure that the groundwater table is not lower than the minimum required level. Then, third, how to maintain the optimal water balance for water sharing based on the landscape, the KHG map I mentioned before. Fifth, avoid the overdraining and the use of fire as land clearing methods. And the last, how to select appropriate commodities that match the characteristic of peatlands. Then, that's all from us. Gracias.
So thank you to our 4 first speakers. We'll now move to the second group of speakers, so you can now go to your seats, but stay on standby for any questions during the discussion, yes? Next group of speakers. So first on vegetation dynamics and biodiversity, we will hear from Eurydice Honorio Coronado from the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew and from Corneille Ewango from the University of Kisangani. So you are welcome to also come on the stage. Thank you. Then we will hear from Simon Lewis from the University of Leeds and UCL on carbon stocks and emission pathways. Jason Leroux will join us online, with a video from the Agricultural Research Council of South Africa on peat fire decision support tools. And then finally, we will have Matthias Drusler from the Peatland Science Center in Germany, also with a video on GHG inventories, dynamics, and emission factors. Here it is.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Eurydice, and I will be talking about a project I'm leading in tropical peatlands using biodiversity to support climate-resilient livelihoods. And this project is led by Kew Gardens and is developed in collaboration with key institutions leading peatland research in tropical countries and also the partners in the UK. Next. Should it, which one? This one? Okay. Okay. The aim of the project is to integrate scientific and local knowledge to develop sustainable and climate-resilient peatland management strategies. We are working in Peru, where I come from, and also in the Congo Basin with Cornel and Ifo, who is not present here. The focus are in three big topics. We are increasing the knowledge about the diversity of plants by digitizing the herbarium collections that they are in local herbaria to increase the knowledge of these species that are occurring in these ecosystems. We are also doing new collections by setting permanent plots and collecting the plants that grow there, and at the same time also monitoring the eco-hydrological conditions where these species can grow. And this project is interdisciplinary. We are also working with social scientists and talking to the community members to understand better the knowledge about these ecosystems and the perception about peatlands. So this is the way that we explore these areas. So we use remote sensing images like Sentinel-2 nowadays, and we use the same combination of bands and colors that Utila Tenoja used in Peru to explore these ecosystems. So you can see on the left-hand side that the swamp that you will be visiting in Iquitos. So this area is called 20 de Enero, and in the yellow box I have highlighted the swamp. And what is interesting in the results of our plots and networks is that peatland ecosystems have low diversity. Well, everyone knew about that. So we found like 20 to 63 species per hectare. But when we map these areas, we see that they contribute to the regional ecosystem diversity because they have different colors, and the reflectance of this, the difference in colors is the reflectance of the different composition that these forests have. And on the right, you can see a similar example of the swamps in Republic of Congo. So what ecosystem types we find in these places? So in Peru, you heard already that are mainly dominated, these peatlands are dominated by palms. So in Peru, they represent 76% of the peatland area based on the map of Adam Hastie. And in the Congo Basin, we find also there are some peat occurring on top of palm swamps. And there the map of Chris says that more or less they represent 50% of the peatland area. So what is interesting, these plants belong to the same subfamily, Calamaidoe. So they have shared similar morphologies and also adaptations to these waterlogged conditions, like the pneumatophorous roots that you see in these pictures. Also, we can find peat on forests where it's dominated by trees. And in Peru, we have this kind of ecosystem called pole forest or Barrial hydromórfico that we call in Spanish, and they represent only 11% of the peatland area. They're dominated by trees, and in the Congo also they talk about this hardwood forest or forêt marécageux. And they represent more or less the other 50% of the territory. We visited with UNEP the Osango site, and what is interesting in these sites is that the trees have really particular characteristics, and they have hard leaves, and you can see this, the litter remaining in the ground for quite longer than possibly in other areas. And also, more rarely, we find peat in seasonally flooded forests. Seasonally flooded forests can be extensive in these wetland areas, but that behave like swamps, they are quite rare. And so only in these small patches of, in Peru, like 2%, they represent only 2%. They're also dominated by trees, and they're different in composition, so they can be distinct. In the Congo Basin as well, Chris has reported the presence of these ecosystems with peat, and we have set up some plots, and there are other species that dominate in these areas. And going to the data set, so we have for now analyzed the composition of these plots. So in the left-hand side, you can see the 12 sites that we are monitoring with the project, and each dot is that one plot, and we're analyzing the floristic composition, how similar these plots are to each other. So you can see in different colors the different ecosystem types, and what is really interesting is to see that there are distinct floristic compositions determining by the different hydrological regimes, acidity and the nutrient nutrient status of the swamps. So each ecosystem is quite distinct. And for me, it was fascinating to see that in terms of floristics, the Republic of Congo, at least the plots that we're including here, showed very similar patterns. We have not finished to analyze the data, so we cannot tell about the nutrients or the hydrological conditions. Another component of the project is trying to understand how much they contribute to the conservation status of the species that grow in these places. So in Peru, where we have more plots, so we have more or less 300 species that we have been checking the conservation status based on the IUCN Red List categories, and we see that only 3% of these species are under the category of endangered or vulnerable. And in the Congo, just with 96 species that we found in these plots with the project, only 5% as well. It's very low. So what we said that even though there are few of these species that are threatened, no, these peatlands serve as an important refuges for plants at risk of extinction. And based on the interviews that we work with the community members, we also reassure that we already know that peatland biodiversity contributes to food security, livelihoods, and the traditions. And you can see some examples here from Peru and the Congo Basin about the uses of plants and animals. So fisheries has been already mentioned. It's the same in Peru as in the Congo. And the fruits as well. I was visiting the Republic of Congo giving a fruit of raffia, and a particular species, the variety of chambo, for those that know Peru. It's called raffia sese there. It was very interesting to see. But they also harvest the sap of the palms to ferment it and produce wine. And in Peru, they also use the textiles, make textiles with the fibers of plants. And dasuri, so those of you who know dasuri, yeah, it occurs across the tropics. So it's really interesting to see similarities in this larvae of the Coloptera that grows on these palms. Key messages. Tropical peatlands have low species diversity, but they contribute to the regional diversity of these tropical regions. They serve as important refuge for threatened plant species, the plants that are threatened elsewhere, and provide significant benefits to local communities, highlighting the conservation value beyond carbon storage. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Corneille Ewango from the University of Kisangani.
Yeah, good morning again, and welcome to the Congo Basin. So I'm Corneille Wang. I'm going to talk to you about the Congo Basin peatland vegetation and dynamics and biodiversity in that area. So it's a work we are doing with University of Leeds, University of Mariangwabi, and also within the Congo pit. And we have got recently assistance, as Iridis said, of the Royal Botanical Garden Kew. Okay, as I said the first day, so the Congo Basin forest peatlands are in a large area of the wetlands, and within it we have the peatland areas. And that peatlands are characterized by two types of vegetations. It's hardwood peat swamp and palm-dominated swamp forest in that area. And so within that area, we have also seasonally inundated mixed forests that form the peatlands in that areas, and it has about 4 to 6 months out of 9 months of the year inundated. And you can see here as this is during the dry season and how it looks during the rain seasons. And also it's shaped by the hydrology. As I said the first day, we have interfluvial peatlands, and it's also influenced by the river flooding. And in both countries, specifically in the Republic of Congo, we have rain-fed interfluvial peatlands, and DRC is more river-influenced peatland, mainly led by the Congo rivers. And within the two systems, there is important input of nutrient river water, and that also is shaping the floristic compositions, species richness, and community structure of the forest in that area. As you can see here, this is the Congo River peatlands where we have laid some transects, and it's really white water with high density of sediment loads in that areas. But in the other side, we have also the black water, and it's poor nutrient, but it's rich in carbon. So about the plant diversity, and we did a short analysis of the two kinds of waters, the black and white waters, and what we see that there is a strong association between of species between the white and the black water in that area. And the outcome of the species pool is also important and linked to environmental condition between the two systems. And white water and black water river are relatively few trees and palm species dominated. About the ecological relationships, we see that there is few species, and specifically Symphonia globulifera and Inglerophyton, that's the Sapotesi, are both correlated with the distance from the river going in deep the forest. And the raffia itself and some other species are more related to peat depth. So it's quite important to see, like the Symphonia species is widespread in the peatlands, and it's also transoceanic species. It's distributed within the Africa, mainly in the Congo Basin, going to Australia and also the Southeast Asia and also to Central America. So it's quite a very linked species to wetland areas. The species richness is also very important, but it's almost the same in the two systems. So the black and the white water has the same species richness on both countries. And also the key fact is that the black river peatland have thicker peat than the white one, and the black water and white water peatlands have similar species richness. And also in the seasonally flooded forest, species richness is very lower compared to the black water. And in common, 75 species that the few data that we have analyzed so far are present in both black and white waters. But that is very, very scattered samples that we have done so far, because as you see, it's very few areas that we have covered, but we need maybe to extend our samples to see how it looks like for the diversity within the forest in that area. And what is also important is in terms when you see the diversity and the flora, and comparing it to what we see on the pollen analysis, it's quite very interesting. We see that from the beginning, there was the peatland in that area comes up with Cyperaceae and Poaceae, that's grasslands. And then it comes slowly, the forest starts recovering that area. And in general, what we see, all those species that emerged earlier and also continued are also found now in the peatland forest areas. And it's very interesting, like a species like the Sapotesi de Manilcara that was emerged very earlier, continue to be most important species in that forest, both in white and black water in that area. So it's really amazing to see how the dynamics of the peatland in that area is forming and it's developing. Both sides that we have done analysis by using the pollen are almost showing itself its own trend of development of the peatland, but in terms of the species development, it's almost the same in that area. And about the diversity, as we know, I said the first day, it's the last peatland that we are starting to understand. So we still have to learn a lot and to document. So far, about 15 years, we didn't know about the peatlands. The first seminal work was done by Lebrun and Gilbert, who classified together all the forests related to water, and also Evrard did focus more in ecological aspect of those forests. That's only two seminal works we know about the both countries, the Republic of Congo and Democratic Republic of Congo. So there was no deep analysis or a survey of vegetation in that area because it's very difficult to access and it's very large, difficult to work. People didn't much wanted to spend time on it. But from the seminal work of Evrard, he documented 163 species in that areas and within 21 families. And most of the species what we see are in both sides of both countries, but they are more linked to edaphic, so hydromorphic soils. But there is no quite specific or specific species that might be characterized the peatland in that area because they are more linked to water. But recently what we are doing in one site, we identified also 100 species of wood and herbaceous plants. But in general, we're still learning and documenting because it's a large area, few data we have collected on the ground, and we need to extend our samples to see what is really characterizing the peatland, flora, and vegetation in that large areas. I think that is what I can share with you right now. But in general, in terms of dynamics of this forest, we don't know much of it because we are talking about the peatland. The peatlands in that area, it's not just the peat, but it's the forest that is the engineering of forming the peatland in that area that we need to know. But can you imagine for that large areas, we are in lack of botanists. I'm the only one botanist working for that areas and covering the two countries. That means I have to spend maybe all the year, 360 days being in the field. That's how when you send me the email, I don't respond. It's not like because I'm busy somewhere, either in my country or the other one. So I think if you want to really serve the Congo Basin peatlands, please invest on training botanists because, as we said, they are like extinct species in that areas. Otherwise, we are now going to know about it. Remember, 60 years later, we can know about the peatland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corneille. Now we will hear from Simon Lewis from the University of Leeds and University College London.
Thanks, everyone. So we'll stay in the Congo Basin, and Corneille is really right. The lack of botanists, in particular, and the limited number of experts is a real break on understanding the peatlands and also protecting them, because it's those people who need to tell the stories about the peatlands to be able to get the ears of the decision makers to protect these peatlands. So I'm going to talk about carbon stocks and emissions pathways, as I've been asked, and of course this is Congo Peat work and with IFO and Corneille. We made this first map of the carbon stocks of the central Congo peatlands. We took more than a third of a ton of samples over the years back to the UK, and we used a random forest model to take environmental parameters to make good estimates of peat thickness, where we have around 500 peat thickness measurements, and then that peat thickness we can convert to carbon because we know about the bulk density and the percentage carbon within a set of cores that we've sampled in the lab very well. It's about 29 billion tons of carbon. That, if it all went into the atmosphere, is about 3 years of global fossil fuel emissions. So it's an enormous stock of carbon. And a small amount in protected areas. Now it's under threat. It's largely intact so far, but it's under threat. And if we want to understand what might happen to this carbon, and we don't have a lot of destruction, then we need a mechanistic model to replicate the peatlands so that we can then understand in a computer what might happen under various interventions so that we can show it to policymakers and they can see the impacts of those decisions before they make them. And our first test of a model is, can it replicate the past? So I showed this yesterday, and this is this 20,000 years of peat accumulation with this portion in going from around 7,000 to 2,000 years ago where we have very shallow peat accumulation. And what other evidence shows that we lost a huge amount of carbon. The water table lowered, and we lost carbon to the atmosphere. Around 50% of the peat core was lost to the atmosphere during that time. Then it stabilized as the climate stabilized, and then we've had, in this site, more than 1.5 meters of peat accumulation in the last less than 2,000 years. And this is happening across the basin. So can we build a model to replicate this? And this core part of being able to do this was the peat core. From the peat core, we can take the leaf waxes from when the leaves were generated and the waxes don't decompose, and we can analyze the chemical composition of those, and it tells us about what the climate was like at the time, how much rainfall there was essentially. And we can use that as the first paleo record of hydroclimate to be able to have the climate records to run the model to be able to then compare with what we've seen in the peat cores. So we started with a model called Digibog, and we used our measurements from the field to parameterize this model, and it's essentially layers of peat and then decomposition and litter inputs and root inputs, and then it tracks that peat over time and updates it, and then we can accumulate the peat if the decomposition is lower than the inputs, or it loses peat when it's the other way around. So we need to know what the precipitation is, which we have from our paleo record, the temperature, our evaporation, and then we can run this model that's parameterized specifically for the Congo Basin peatlands, the hardwood swamps in this case, and try and get the model to simulate the past. And this is all published. And what we see here is that, unsurprisingly, given what Hans and others have said, that when the water table is above the surface, then we get more plant inputs than the decay, and we get peat accumulation. And then we can see in this drought, actually, only from around 3,000 years ago is it getting below the surface sufficient amount of time that we then see a large carbon loss and emissions to the atmosphere. So on the right-hand side, we can see the CEN core is our measured core, the one I showed before, and our model and its simulation is in the kind of purple color, the simulation, and they're a pretty good match. So we can actually build, 2 minutes left, oh dear. So we can actually do a pretty good match. Now, if we can match the past, then we can start thinking about using the model to go forward into the future. So we then use the same model and 10 climate models going forward and look at the change in the peat accumulation. And what we see is actually this situation is quite uncertain. At low warming levels, we might see an increase in peat depth, or we might see a loss. And that's because in Central Africa there is no consistency in what the climate will do going forwards. Some models show a wetting, some models show a drying. But what we do see when we look at this going forward with very high emissions into the future and very high warming is that the likelihood of catastrophic loss of the peatlands increases with increasing warming. And this is all unsurprisingly related to the water table depth. You lose the water table depth goes down, we lose the carbon. And this paper will be out next month. And then we can then add on top of the climate change going forward, what happens if we drain this peatland for, say, oil palm plantations? So this is where the yellow box in 2025, we simulate a drainage of the peatland. What we see is a catastrophic loss of carbon. But that catastrophic loss of carbon is enhanced at higher rates of warming. And again, this is related to the water table. So it goes back to like, keep the peatlands wet, and we can keep this carbon out of the atmosphere. And this is very important. This is a picture from the 1980s in Congo. This is a logging camp on the left, and they are going to log some of the areas, selectively log the dark green areas. The light green is swamp forest. And they built this road going forward. Then someone flew over it after we published the paper showing about the peatlands. And this is the situation a few years ago. Now you can see the same logging camp on the left. You can see the same dark green forest. And you can see the road. But what has happened in the intervening years is that the entire of that swamp forest, which we think is a peatland, every single tree has died. No one planned this. This was a complete accident. What we think happened is they built the road and they changed the drainage pattern. And the drainage pattern has then killed the trees, not just nearby, but going like tens and tens of kilometers up the river. It's an astonishing, you can see it in the remote sensing all the way up. And this was an accident because people didn't know about the implications of their actions. But with the modeling, we can then show people before that happens what might happen if they go forward with this and hopefully avoid these accidental impacts like we've seen in Congo there. For us, we are trying to produce, show that the peatlands are close to the edge of what's possible as peatlands. And the impacts of climate change are uncertain, but the impacts of land use change are very, very clear, that they will be strongly negative for carbon stocks, and of course then the knock-on implications for the biodiversity and the people who are utilizing the peatlands for livelihoods as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. So now we will play the video from Jason Leroux from the Agricultural Research Council of South Africa.
So as you can see on this graph, South Africa has experienced an increasing number of peat fires since 1988 until 2020 when the study was conducted. The deepest burn was 7 meters. My name is Jason Leroux and I'm from the Agricultural Research Council of South Africa. Today I'm going to share with you a tool that was developed for managing peat fires in South Africa. So as you can see on this graph, South Africa has experienced an increasing number of peat fires since 1988 until 2020 when the study was conducted. The deepest burn was 7 meters and the average burn was 1.3 meters. Burning are almost always attributed to lowered water tables, especially in South Africa where most of our peatlands are groundwater dependent. So here's an example of central pivots lowering the water table, forestry and subsistence agriculture, alien invasives, in this case it's wattle, and these result in peat fires. For those of you who haven't seen a peat fire, this is what some of them look like from the front. And this is from the top. And here is a video taken in a burning peatland, characterized by smoldering burns that are subsurface. And while this peat fire has smoke, there's many peat fires where there are no smoke and all you see is wilted vegetation and ash. The peat fire decision support tool that we created is essentially a decision tree for selecting the most appropriate method to extinguish a peat fire, and it's based on the peatland specific conditions and the resources available. It's designed for a wide audience. It includes safety precautions, step-by-step guidance, and the final product will be an online tool, but it's still in development. So this presentation will show the information that goes into the tool. And reasons why this tool is required is that we've learned the lesson the hard way in the past. When there's a peat fire, people don't know what to do or who to contact. All the wrong methods have been used. So traditional firefighting methods, we've found out that they don't work the hard way. You spray the top of the burning peat, the ash compacts or the peat compacts, and the subsurface fire continues to burn beneath the surface, and rainfall does not always extinguish it. And by having this tool available, people can act quickly. This brings down the cost because the fire does not spread as much if you extinguish it quickly. The landowner is responsible, so the quicker it can get extinguished, the better. And it becomes a lot easier to extinguish a small peat fire. 3 urgent actions that people are recommended to do, being to communicate, prepare, and then extinguish the peat fire. It gets broken down into who they should communicate and why. So formal is departments, fire departments, and fire protection associations, and informal is in the public through WhatsApp groups, newspaper, social media, telling them to avoid the area and that the smoke from a peat fire is toxic. Is then to prepare. Peatlands can burn for many months, so it's important to establish a fire break around to protect the adjacent terrestrial vegetation from burning. The protective equipment that people should wear are explained in the tool, and then we go about and explain how to determine the burn edge in a peatland to prepare for strategic firefighting. There's 2 methods. The one is using a steel rod, which you insert into the peat and you feel its temperature. If it's cool, it's not burning beneath you. If it's warm, then it is. The other is then a thermal camera, but this is only effective to 0.5 meters. It's often best used with a drone. So there you can see a picture of a little peat fire on the left, but on the right, if you use a thermal camera, that's what you see. That was more small scale. Look here at a larger scale. And there's another example there. So safety precautions are very important. The tool takes you to the 4 methods that we recommend. And as you go through step-by-step questions that are asked, it helps you then to determine which method would be the most appropriate. The first is controlled dam releases, firefighting using a spike tool, firefighting using hand augering, and then digging trenches. The illustrated picture of the first one where controlled dam releases would help to extinguish the peat fire. It does require obviously an upstream dam. The peatland needs to be unchanneled. As you can see, the top right is not unchanneled, but bottom right is. The water would simply flow away. It must be relatively flat because no risk of erosion, and the dam must be able to slowly control release water so you don't flush all the peat away. This is the spike tool. This has been the most widely used and accepted method. Spike tool is essentially a metal pipe with a T-bar handle attached to a fire hose that's got small openings at the bottom that you can then insert in the ground and saturate burning peat. It does require large amounts of water. It can be pumped from a river, portable dam, or truck or tanker. These are connected by a fire hose to the spike tool. And then we give more additional information about the people required, the spacing between the tool, how long to apply it, and where to start the application. For example, upslope and upwind. Tool, we also continuously remind people about the safety precautions and when to apply what type of safety precaution. Mainly because peatlands have unstable ground. You see in the top right the crack. So this peatland was all burning. It doesn't look like it, but subsurface there was a fire going on. Method is hand augering, but this only works for small peatlands. Hand augering is essentially using a soil auger or peat auger, making small holes around the peatland and then pouring water through it using a hose pipe with water from a tanker or river into the peat. The reason small is hard to define is if you're one person, a peatland like in the picture is doable, But if you're a couple of people with a few augers, you could do a bit of more of a larger peatland. But it all comes down to time and effort. Method is trenching, digging trenches. This is highly effective, but it can be highly destructive as well. For that reason, we often recommend it as the last resort. But if a peat fire has just started and you dig a trench, it can be very effective. The problem is that firstly, you dig a trench in a peatland, but secondly, you essentially lose everything on one side of a trench. So it's a matter to cut off a part of a peatland and for the fire to then be isolated and burn itself out. It does require extensive rehabilitation, which we explain, as well as in South Africa, it requires regulatory authorization. And there's two means of that here. It's pre-authorization or as an emergency action. Look, information about trench construction, how deep it should be dug. So it's to the mineral layer or until the water table. And if you don't reach the water table, we recommend then applying water to the trench. And that is essentially the information that goes into our peat tool. Thanks, everyone.
So hello to everybody in Peru. I'm sorry I cannot stay there. For that reason, you will get my presentation as a video. The topic is greenhouse gas inventories, dynamics and emission factors. I'm Matthias Drösler, head of the Peatlands Science Center in Germany. My presentation is stratified with very short bullets, greenhouse gas inventories from Tier 1 to Tier 3, the Tier 3 approach in Germany. Then we have a bit more detailed case study from Bavaria in Germany based on the Klimobile project. I give some outlook to the SimPeat project where Peru is participating in the short conclusion. So from Tier 1 to Tier 3, what was the background? We did a great study of EU peatlands, current carbon stocks and trace gas fluxes already in 2008, so almost 20 years ago. And what came out was very interesting that this left-hand picture here shows the area coverage of peatlands across the European countries. And the right-hand one is the first estimate at that time with emissions from these countries. And what you see is Germany is the 6th in area coverage, but was on that time and is still the first in emissions. So that was alarming for us and was leading then to a lot of research in Europe and specifically in Germany about that topic. All of you know the wetland supplement of 2014. That's the Tier 1 level once the countries are not holding individual emission factors and need then to report to you in FCCC. So at that stage in 2013 or 2013, we compiled together everything which was known, and one of the key chapters here is chapter 2 about the drained inland organic soils. But it is not enough if you have high emissions to just apply Tier 1 or even Tier 2 approaches. So for that reason, I give you a short insight about the Tier 3 approach in Germany. So Germany has about 1.8 million hectares organic soils. Now it's a bit updated to 1.93 million hectares organic soils. That's the major land use on that organic soils, and the stratification is that the majority is in the north and in the south of these areas. So the domination is grassland and then cropland and forest, unutilized land, and so the category for nature and restored areas is really small. After compiling everything what was known about the emissions, some regression factor came out, and that was headed by the Thünen Institute in Braunschweig and is based here on a publication of T. Meyer in 2020. And what you see is a dependency of the emissions from the water table. A bit strange is that we have then a linear approach of that regressions from minus 50 centimeters on, and that is based on this widespread of the different emission factors once the land use is drained on the organic soils. That is the reporting table from the implied emission factors in Germany. And here you see the major emissions come from the cropland here with 40 tons, but as well grassland with more than 30 tons is a high emitter. The rewetted organic soils came down to around 5.5 tons, and that can be even lower once paludicultures are used. So in the overall result, Germany is emitting 54 million tons of greenhouse gases in 2021. So from the national inventory in 2023. And this is equivalent to 7% of the total German greenhouse gas emissions in that year. That's really a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in the several sectors. We were not completely satisfied with the level of dependency and regression, and for that reason we looked a bit more in detail to a case study of one area of Germany in Bavaria. So that is that part here. You see that is a province of Germany with 290 million hectares of organic soils. Here are already the updated numbers of 1.93 million hectares in Germany. Here as well, grassland is dominating, but forest comes next, and cropland is a bit less here. And you see the stratification as well on peatlands spread over Bavaria. We have a long record and long run of measurements which we used and which we could use for that project. And the idea was to build a new map of peatland greenhouse gas emissions for Bavaria in the following decades, develop maps showing the greenhouse gas reduction potential. So that was not just reporting, but as well trying to have scenarios where we look to the future and see then if this is possible to have a pathway towards climate neutrality in the organic soils. That's the background with almost 180 annual data from different techniques, so chamber techniques, eddy covariance techniques, and automated chamber techniques. What came out, and that is maybe the interesting topic now, that this is a bit a difference from what we saw before, that we have a regression graph which is not really fading out but is still increasing. There is a bit more uncertainty in the lower drained areas, so below minus 50 centimeters. And there the uncertainty comes a lot, or high variance comes a lot from other factors like land use intensity, for example. But as well, what is interesting is that there were areas which were net climate cooler, like this near natural forest parts here on the bog peatland. For the modeling, to get a bit further, we did not stop by having a generalized regression from emission factors to water table, but we have an individualized regression factor according to the different land use types, and that is really a breakthrough and a new level of reducing uncertainty here. Based on that, we could then as well use a second information source, which was very important, a modeled water table map with a resolution originally from 25 meters, and now it's downscaled to 2 meters over whole Bavaria, over the whole 290,000 hectares. And with that, we could then you have here the comparison of the 25 meters grid with the higher resolution of the 2 meters grid and the resolution is much better now, and there's new information in which allows us to have these water table map. This is one extreme important driver for the emissions. At the end, the peatland emission map as of 2020 came out for Bavarian peatlands with about 6.7 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year. That's about 8% of Bavaria's total greenhouse gas emissions. And that's as well for an industrialized country, really a big share of emissions coming from a single source area from the land use change and forestry on organic soils. We traced then scenarios as well, and I just show you this single one, the land use optimized scenario, where we had all the grasslands converted, to, intensive grassland converted to paludiculture, the cropland converted to paludiculture, the grasslands, the extensively used grasslands then changing as well, and forests are managed under wet conditions. And for that reason, it was then the interesting results that from these 6.7 million tons CO2 equivalents, we came down to minus 0.5 million tons CO2 equivalents. And that is really a big reduction even under the current climate. An outlook to SEMPEAT, because SEMPEAT is an important project which is now in the start across all these Andean countries, from Patagonia over Peru, where you're sitting at the moment, Ecuador and Colombia. I think a lot of partners are at the moment here present in that GPI conference. So just saying hello virtually to all of you. And I think it is important to remember that this project has then the overall goal that we would like to overcome the situation that we have not really good emission factors for this area, and as well have to try to find out something about scenarios and management activities. To overcome the IPCC 2014 Tier 1 limitations, it is key to measure greenhouse gas exchange with standardized approaches, eddy and NAE chambers in underrepresented regions. And that's exactly where SEMPEAT heads on, because the values from the IPCC 2014 do not really include or do not really match with the specific situations which we have there. Model the exchange with environmental drivers to derive year balances is important. Develop implied emission factors for Tier 2 or better. Apply model-based upscaling with land use specific regressions and high resolution activity data, as I showed you before. And then we are at Tier 3. And my wish is that you have now a bit an overview where we are staying at the moment and what is the goal. So just by combining all these factors of measurements with high resolution activity data and tracing scenarios, we can move the peatlands towards a partner in climate mitigation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we will have now some time for discussion before we move on to our next, also very technical session, which will be on mapping, monitoring, and MRV systems.
Thanks, everyone. For those of you that are not scientists in the room, and you find that very painful, it's such a critical moment for yourselves. This is all of the work. You know, this is by being in the room and listening to each other, trying to figure out these terminologies and understanding really what we're digging into here. You can also understand, respect, and celebrate the importance of working together. Because as we said, you know, you can't manage what you don't know, but also you also can't finance something that you can't account for metrically or model it appropriately. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us from South Africa. We really appreciate your time and your presentation. South Africa has been doing incredible peatland work and the peatland mapping work, as well as the work that's going to be presented a little bit later by your other colleagues. I'd like to open the room for questions, prioritizing a question for Jason, if you have, about peatland fires, community peatlands firefighting as well as prevention. I know they have a big program there in South Africa. Are there any questions in the room about peat fires? Yes, thanks. Catherine? Yeah. And do introduce yourself so that we can get it on tape and people know who's speaking. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Catherine Fitzgerald with the Nature Conservancy. And thanks for your presentation, Jason. I was curious about the causes of the peat fires in South Africa. Is it primarily around intentionally setting fires for livelihoods, or are they lightning strikes? What are you seeing there?
Can you hear me, everyone?
We can.
Okay. The majority of the fires were started by veld fires, so it's adjacent vegetation fires that then spread into the peatlands. I think 2 out of the 26 systems was lightning. About 4 were subsistence farming next door, but the majority were normal veld fires that move into a peatland system.
Thanks so much. And Jean-Jacques Bambuta.
Bien. La session a été riche en informations scientifiques, mais depuis 6 ans, nous, en République démocratique du Congo, nous nous interrogeons sur un certain nombre de faits. Tel que nous présentons la chose en ce qui concerne les tourbières, nous nous focalisons uniquement sur l'importance du stock de carbone. Et pourtant, les tourbières ne sont pas que carbone, parce que ce sont des espaces de vie des populations. Voilà pourquoi il serait important que, dans l'avenir, à ce magnifique travail qui est fait par les scientifiques ici, qu'à ce scientifique soient ajoutés d'autres scientifiques. Je parle de sociologues, je parle des anthropologues. Parce que ici, nous n'avons pas suffisamment expliqué la relation entre l'homme et la nature. La même chose en ce qui concerne les menaces, parce que notre travail consiste à conserver les tourbières. Ceci veut dire que nous devons absolument tout faire pour pouvoir réduire les menaces. Mais quelles sont les menaces que nous avons? Nous avons des menaces climatiques et on a des menaces anthropiques. Je mets de côté les menaces qui peuvent venir parce que quelqu'un a pris une mauvaise décision en termes d'affectation des terres. Mais en réalité, si nous travaillons aussi sur un module de MRV, de suivi des tourbières par les communautés, nous aurons gagné le pari de la conservation. Parce que les grandes activités qui détruisent les tourbières ne sont pas que de mauvaises décisions, c'est surtout les pratiques des communautés sur cet écosystème. Mais si les communautés elles-mêmes peuvent suivre l'évolution de cet écosystème, parce que ne vous en faites pas, ils savent, parce que ce sont ces communautés qui savent que si la tourbière n'est pas en bon état, ils n'auront plus de poissons, ils n'auront plus une eau de bonne qualité. On a parlé de vin de palme ici, il y a beaucoup de choses, il n'y aura plus de miel, il n'y aura plus de champignons. Donc, on doit insister sur ce pôle. J'ai dit 2 choses, des anthropologues, des sociologues, mais aussi un MRV communautaire de tourbières. Merci.
Yes, thanks so much, Jean-Jacques. Indeed, this is also why a lot of the work that the Global Peatlands Initiative has been doing is to bring people together, the interdisciplinary science that's needed to look at the whole problem. So in our research working group, we have many different types of scientists researching and tackling challenging questions together. And we do see that that is a growing trend, especially working across disciplines in this rapid evidence synthesis work that we are about to publish. Thanks for that comment indeed. Are there any other questions, clarifications, ideas in the room? Yes, please, Oscar.
Sí, muchas gracias. Hay una pequeña inquietud y es que precisamente en Colombia se dan los incendios y algo que es supremamente difícil de manejar son los incendios subterráneos. nos estaban comentando de una cámara térmica que es capaz de visualizar esos incendios y ese calor. Entonces hay dos preguntas. ¿Qué capacidad en términos de área tendría esa cámara y también en términos de profundidad? Hay unos que son seguramente superficiales, pero hay otros que son un poco más profundos. Eso sería ahí. Gracias por la presentación.
Thank you, Oscar. And I believe that that was a question to you, Jason. So I'll just summarize the question. I'm not sure you heard it or any translation. Oscar was saying that in where he's from, in Colombia, they also have peat fires, or what they call subterranean fires, and that for the detection, they're really looking for techniques of detection, and they noticed the heat sensor cameras that you mentioned with drones. Can you tell us a little bit more about their feasibility in detecting fires, and what type of peatland are you using them to detect these underground fires on?
Okay, so the cameras that I've showed was once we almost know that there's a peat fire there. So it's a FLIR camera is the brand that's the most commonly used, and it can be mounted on a drone. I know there's a bit of remote sensing research going into detecting the peat fires, but I'm not clued up on that to be able to answer on it.
Thanks, Jason. We do have some peatland fire experts also in the room. Indonesia has quite a bit of technology, and some of the interesting technology that we heard from when we visited Indonesia in 2017 was because it was such an emergency. Jason, you mentioned the toxicity of peat haze and smoke. They had also crowdsourcing. So you had actually started to look at trolling through social media. Can you, either any one of you, share a little bit more about the multi-tiers of detection, prediction, and firefighting coordination in Indonesia, please? Bambang? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My colleagues from South Africa. I was there in your country 2017, and I learned so much about fire prevention also using like a camera, then reporting to the community. Then the result is very good. Okay, in terms of Indonesia, we have what we call as a national platform to inform about the potential fire through what we call as Sipongi. Yeah, Sipongi. This is like application for the national, which enable overlaid by another thematic map. Maybe, for example, like ecosystem, and then also with the land use holder company, including consension, including community. And then we use radar lidar and also the high resolution of the satellite. Then after having like a hotspot, we inform to the land use holder entity, and then we can define what kind of strategy. Maybe, for example, if the hotspot not potentially become fire, then you have to check to the field. But if this is already fire, but in the small scale, we have like a village, village people who are concerned about the fire. This is like a Manggala Agni Indonesia language. This is like a small scale area, to combat with the fire. But if in this big scale, then we have like a emergency call in a provincial level using like an airplane, like a helicopter and whatever, like a bombing for the water. But just in case like 2015, and also 2020 with the big fire over there. Of course, we have a modify of the cloud and become, rain over there. So by having this, a kind of mechanism from technology and then, involving to the decision making from the top level, president until the head of the village, and then the system informed directly, then of course the fire action can be, handled immediately. And then this is because we understand clearly the impact of the fire become not only for the landscape, but also for the emission of the contribution for the climate. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's an absolute incredible control center, command center. Lucky we've got mobile technology, right? And we've got AI and all these tools at our hands, including available satellite mapping and prediction. Same thing we have actually in northern Canada. I think Indonesia is in a very unique position because you have such a population that you can mobilize against fires. I think it's also very difficult when you have communities living in the far north that are facing fires, but there are maybe 5 people, or 25 people in Tierra del Fuego as well. I have a hand in the room. Thanks. Go ahead, Carla. Yeah. Yes, and then Erin.
Thanks for the presentation and for the information, which is really key as we're seeing fires more regularly. I guess my question is there a central place where this information is available? Because usually when the emergency happens, is that one is kind of looking for the resources and one has the least time to go find different sources of information or contacts for guidance. So I was just wondering if there's a specific repository on peatland fires. Thanks.
Yes, you can find a specific repository on peatland fires in our fabulous virtual peatland pavilion, including the documentation of the South-South exchange between Indonesia and South Africa, firefighter to firefighter. South Africa has published their tools and approaches, and also Indonesia has an online space where we can find also fire detection, fighting, and prevention measures there. And then we have a partnership with FAO and UNEP and other partners, and this is called the Global Fire Hub, actually, working together for a very long time, looking at integrated fire management, looking at how those tools and approaches can be applied at a community level, at the national level, at a transboundary level. So that's been bolstered up recently with a universal resolution on fires at the United Nations Assembly 7, where all countries and all of our major groups and stakeholders agreed that wildfires were an urgent and important issue. And within that text, it specifically mentions peat fires. So that's also something that's been happening as a global attention. There are many resources. You can land them on either one of these pages, and if you can't find them easily, we'll share them with you directly. Carla?
Merci beaucoup, Diana. Mon intervention est plus un commentaire et je voudrais appuyer ce que Jean-Jacques a dit en disant que malheureusement, les financements internationaux sont liés à l'émotion. Et l'émotion en ce moment, c'est le changement climatique, la plupart du temps. Alors pourtant, nous devons voir dans quelle mesure favoriser la recherche transdisciplinaire, multidisciplinaire. Et c'est là où vient ma question. Est-ce que nous avons pensé à mettre en place une stratégie de plaidoyer? Parce que nous devons continuer le plaidoyer pour que les financements arrivent. Peut-être qu'il va falloir qu'on voit dans quelle mesure. On en a parlé le mardi, comment faire du tape à l'œil, mais ce serait bien qu'on voit effectivement l'opérationnalisation d'une telle approche. Merci.
Yes, thanks very much. And the Congo Basin has a very unique opportunity with the establishing of the Congo Basin Science Panel. That is the whole purpose of bringing together interdisciplinary scientists to actually also answer the questions, deeply investigate what has been going on. Another important piece of information yesterday that I'm not sure all of you listened to, or maybe we passed over with the yellow and red flags, but Indonesia and the Greifswald-Meyer Center signed a memorandum of understanding under the International Tropical Peatland Center, and that is a mechanism available for other academic institutions that want to have that direct partnership and contribute to the International Tropical Peatland Center partnership by having postdocs, having exchanges. The International Tropical Peatland Center as well has the ambition and the partners within it to set up common assets, common study stations. As we know, JICA is putting a study station into the Democratic Republic of Congo. All of our Global Peatlands Initiative partners are obviously going to be welcome to be there and use that study station. And there will be other places where study stations are not available, but can be created through partnership. So do let us know. We can facilitate those discussions on exchanging curricula programs, exchanging PhD, exchanging training programs. There's a big training program which UNEP and the Congo Peat team are supporting in the Democratic Republic of Congo, training women on how to do the peatland coring and peatland mapping with amazing results, as well as other communities. So do we have another question? Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. 2 more questions. Yes, and then coffee soon.
Well, my name is Ricardo. I'm from Ecuador, and I'm working at Universidad San Francisco de Quito. And my question is for Simon. I was wondering, I think it's very interesting what you presented, and I was thinking about how long this ghost period has to be in order for you to estimate the carbon decomposition. Thinking about sites in Ecuador that we have been draining for the last 200 years. And if you can see the drainage signal and that associated then next to the restoration of the site to estimate how much carbon we could have lost if we haven't restored the site and how much you have lost because of the drainage. But the ghost period that you were looking at, it was like 2,000 years or something like that. So
I think it's a bit difficult with the counterfactual. So like what would have happened if we didn't do this, because it's in the past and we don't know. I mean, you might be able to make some assumptions if the drainage hasn't gone on too long and you've got deeper peat, then you could look at the accumulation rate in the past and apply that going forward and then subtract off. But in terms of the actual signal, drain the peatland and it's oxidizing straight away. And you can measure that. And you can, in Southeast Asia, you can't quite see it in real time, but you can go back each year and see how much has been lost. It's huge.
I'm going to invite Hans to add to that response, and then Matt.
Yes, directly about that, because it's a nice example of possible south-south connection.
Yes.
In the inland central Kalimantan, we have found that all the peat deposits are truncated. They are missing the last thousands of years. And we have made a conceptual model where it was possible to link that to the abrupt increase of El Nino activity. And we could link it to the signal in front of the coast of Peru, because when it is raining much in Peru, there is a lot of sediment coming in. And that was very nicely relatable to the dryness in Kalimantan only in the inland, not in the coast, but in the inland, Kalimantan. So my question also to Simon is, do you think that there could be a link 2,000 years ago is abrupt increase of El Nino, so that we have also, call it a negative south-south connection?
Central Congo Basin is relatively insulated from the El Nino impacts. The reason why that drying happened is axial precession of the Earth's globe. So it's the wobble in the axis. So that's why the Sahara was green and became dry, plus some feedbacks, and that extended right down to the equator. Less severe, but that drought didn't need to be too big to tip the system into releasing carbon rather than absorbing it. It's very hard to estimate, but it's a few hundred millimeters, maybe 300 millimeters a year less rainfall, but that's enough to tip it over the boundary.
Thanks, Simon. Matt, you had your hand, and then we've got Rob, Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just a brief question, and more apologies if I missed this, but I was wondering, a question for Jason. I'm Matt from FAO, and I didn't catch if the fires that are happening in South Africa, if they're happening in areas, if there are certain areas that are more vulnerable than others, for example, the areas you showed that have invasive species, or if there are areas that are drained and used, or if these are just natural occurrences with dry periods or dry seasons in dry areas, or what is that? Can you describe that just a little bit?
Yeah, so we've got 3 hotspots of where peat fires occur. The one is in our northwest province where there's dolomitic geology, and all the potable water of the areas use that groundwater. So and agriculture is linked to it as well. The others in the Cape and the mountains where erosion's a big problem. And the other is in the east coast where forestry of alien trees lowers the water table. So all 3 hotspots is linked to a direct land use change, and then peat fires occur because of that.
Thank you so much for that, Jason, and for the question, Matt. Rob?
Yeah, Rob Soane from UK Wildlife Trust. I'm just going back to the tipping points in these peatland systems. We know that those 3 big tropical forests are really important for climate stability across the globe. And what's interesting in these presentations is just how much peatland there is in those systems. There's an enormous amount of peatlands in those systems that must be having an enormous part of the climate regulation within those tropical forest systems. We also know that those systems have switched back and forth through tipping points through the past millennia. So we know that the Amazon was grassland community at one time and has switched across to forest and back again and so on. We can see that sort of impact. So I'm just wondering, we've seen how fragile these things, how fragile these peatland systems are. How does any of the tropical peatland scientists in the room have any understanding of how important those peatlands are in terms of maintaining the whole tropical forest system? And is drainage or climate change associated tipping points could then impact upon the rest of the forest system and indeed the global climate system as a result?
Any takers? Yes, Simon, thanks. Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you.
You want to make a comment on that?
David Valderrama from Wetlands International Argentinian office. I will try to explain my idea in English. Maybe I need to switch to Spanish.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay. No, just for my question is, you are working to prevent or to extinct fires in degraded peatlands. So I think that or this kind of fires occurs because the peatlands are degraded, are drained. So where is the perception of the communities or the local authorities about the necessity to re-wet these peatlands degraded, not just to prevent fires, not prevent the drying of the peatlands? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is to you, Jason. If you managed to hear that fully, otherwise I can summarize.
No, I heard. Yeah, no, of course, we agree completely. Most of the time, the people living next to the peatlands are not the ones that caused the fire. It's broader land use changes that are driven by different agendas, and the people living nearby are the ones that pay the price. But we completely agree, and we are working on that, like you said.
Thanks so much. And to respond to Rob's question about the dynamics, of course, working across the tropical, for Simon, the tropical band, but we do know as well how much Congo Basin is important for Africa, and also this one for the continent and others.
So in terms of the peatlands themselves, so a few percent of each continent's tropical forests are peat swamp forests. So small, disproportionate for carbon storage, but still relatively small, but important. In terms of climatic drying in the geological period, then those peatlands have become refugia. Those wetland areas become refugia. So in that sense, they're absolutely essential for the whole continent's forests. But in terms of the transport of moisture and the recycling of that moisture for then depositing further rainfall further on downwind, even if they dry out and they start emitting carbon from the peat, there will still be transpiring, and the productivity will still be very similar. In fact, it might even be higher. So they're not, in terms of the productivity, because the productivity of a terra firma tropical forest is higher than a peatland tropical forest. So actually, it's probably not going to change those long-term patterns of the rainfall, unless you have sufficient drying that those become the remaining forests, and then they will obviously be disproportionately important.
Exactly. And we are experiencing, a warming climate everywhere, and I think people are happy to be back to a cooler space here. Eurydice, one last question, and then we're going to close for coffee, please.
It's only a comment about how vulnerable these ecosystems are, and in terms of contribution, I don't think that we have enough knowledge, as Christelle just mentioned now. But I couldn't imagine how water will drain along these rivers if these wetlands were not there. So possibly people wouldn't be living along the rivers if these wetlands were not there. And something that in terms of susceptibility is that we talk a lot about drought, and drought affects the peat itself, but the vegetation is more affected by the flooding. And flooding, for example, in a regional level in Amazonia is also changing. And they can completely change the composition of the forest. At the picture that Simon showed, with this road blocking, and then if the water doesn't flows as normally it does in these wetlands, the vegetation dies just because the flooding goes a bit above the limit of these roots can tolerate. So no oxygen, the plants die. So we need to talk about that dual effect that we have in these wetlands. So drought affects the peat, and flooding affects the vegetation. Yeah, just an extra comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Too much, too little. We want everything to stay stable, right? That's our aim.